Assalamu alaikum, hello and welcome to The Health Show with me, Alistair Greener. As you're aware, each week we're joined by a health expert in the specialist subject being discussed. Looking at how you can change your health and lifestyle for the better, we offer an alternative viewpoint from our health experts who attend the show. And we really hope that this will help guide you in the right direction towards better health. If you'd like any further information on the programme, then please do get in touch at healthshow@islamchannel.tv. Now, today we're looking at stress and anxiety recovery, and we're taking a slightly different approach to our show this week. Charles Linden has gone through the stress and anxiety since the age of 4, and it took him more than 22 years to recover from multiple conditions such as health anxiety, eating disorders, mood swings and agoraphobia. Director of Charles Linden Tree, he also considers himself as a mental health activist, as well as an educator whose goal is to help eliminate other people's disorders and emotions related to mental health. Joining Charles is his wife, Beth. Now, Beth Linden is Director of Anxiety Recovery Retreats and Linden Tree Education. Beth's role within the organisation is as Retreats Director and the Director of the NCFE Recovery Practitioner Accreditation course. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in, and it's such a huge topic at the moment when we talk about anxiety, so thanks very much indeed for coming in. But before we talk to our guests a little bit more, let's take a look at this short clip and try and understand the reasons why one may need to seek a recovery programme or attend a retreat. Well, thanks again for joining us. And it's really interesting watching the video there, because one of the things you talk a lot there about is anxiety. And we hear lots of these different terms: anxiety, stress, various mental health disorders and things. First of all, start off with stress and anxiety. What's the difference between them?
Well, stress is the overall blanket term to cover all manner of mental health conditions. Anxiety is a specific disorder of the emotion of fear, and that's the vital difference. Anxiety isn't an emotion. Many people confuse the words fear and anxiety and use them and swap them around and use them in the same way. But ultimately, you can only have anxiety when you suffer from an anxiety condition. Fear is the normal emotional response that everybody should experience every day, and it's the emotion that developed to keep us safe. As part of the evolution of mankind, we've evolved to understand our environment and respond to it appropriately. And fear is the thing that keeps us very safe in that environment. Anxiety is the disorder of that emotion. So it is a condition.
And let's go back to the very beginning. You know, we were saying from the age of 4, you were suffering from anxiety. Give us a little bit of an idea of your background and when it was first recognised that there was some form of disorder.
Do you know what? I think during my childhood, it was never actually recognised that it was a disorder. I mean, I knew that I was different to all the other children. At the age of 4, it all started strangely with my lunch. I cracked my thermos flask, and when I picked it up and looked inside, there was broken glass in my tomato soup. And from that moment on, I sieved all of my food through my teeth. So I knew I was behaving strangely. I knew that my behaviours weren't appropriate to the environment I was in, and nobody else around me seemed to suffer from those conditions. But I don't think at any point during my suffering, and that went from OCD to panic disorder to agoraphobia, school phobia, I was just generally very agoraphobic and tense in any situation. But again, I didn't realise it was a disorder, probably until I was in my early 20s. I lived out in Germany for a while, and it became massively exacerbated by the environment out there. I was away from my family, didn't have a support network. But it wasn't actually till I was 26 that I noticed that I had actually got something I needed to really address. To that point, it had been manageable. And that's when I, sought treatment, psychological treatment, medical treatment, but nothing worked. And my health, my general physical health declined as well as my mental health. And this overwhelming sense of vulnerability and weakness. So it was at 26 that I really took stock and thought, I can't continue my life like this. And my psychiatrist said to me that I was sort of condemned to a life of very limited environments. I'd probably never have children or get married. And it was a very, very dark story, really.
I mean, yeah, we hear this all the time. In fact, funny enough, just last week we were doing a show on stress and anxiety as well from a different perspective. And the sort of symptoms that you talk about, the way that it manifests itself is something that a lot of people will be very familiar with. What about you, Beth? Did you have any of these disorders at all, or were you fortunate enough not to be exposed to any of that?
When we mention stress, I think I've suffered in the past with sort of work-related pressure and stress, but to the extent of an anxiety disorder, no. In fact, I'm the only person in the organisation that hasn't had an anxiety disorder, because we tend to employ people that, for obvious reasons, that have suffered, because they can relate to our clients. But obviously I was with Charles for the latter part of the condition when it was hellish, so kind of was the other side of it, desperately wanting to help him but not knowing how to.
And let's be honest, there are so many people who are in exactly your situation.
Absolutely.
They're living with people who sometimes won't even actually face the reality that there is something wrong. And we'll come to that a little bit later on, because that's a massive issue, is to get people to actually recognise that this is not normal and that there is actually help out there. There's lots of different things. You mentioned your psychiatrist there. There's lots of different ways that people will try and deal with these disorders. What are the most common that people will normally go for?
Well, I think initially probably their GP. Now, the GP has got really two courses of action: medication or psychotherapy and psychiatry. They generally start with medication. It seems an easier option to take something that subdues the disorder rather than addressing the core disorder itself. But generally, if that doesn't work, they're then referred to something like CBT, for example, or maybe clinical hypnosis.
And CBT, we should say cognitive
behavioural therapy.
Yeah.
Which is a form of therapy that attempts to get you to change your cognition, which is your thought, to affect your emotional responses. Well, of course, the problem with that is that isn't the science of how it works. So, unfortunately, what happens is that people tend then to focus on their condition. As part of the structure of that therapy, you do focus on how you feel and how you respond. And that, of course, embellishes the core condition itself.
Now, you've developed a completely different system, and you claim that it comes from a far more scientific background than maybe other treatments out there. How did you come across this? How did you develop it from your own experience?
Well, through necessity, really. I had a little bit of a moment of enlightenment, if you want to call it that, in a situation I got myself into when I was chronically anxious. And I was put in a situation where I was working in a volunteer centre, and it was a very intense environment. And it was at that point that I realised that when I was intellectually engaged at a high level, my fear levels seemed to drop. So my chronic anxiety, my panic attacks, the intrusive thoughts, the inappropriate thoughts, they all seemed to be at a lower level when I was doing stuff. So ultimately what happened was I recovered. I created a system that caused me to recover very quickly, and then from that started to research why that was. I mean, I needed to understand what was happening, because people around me, I was going to the day hospital locally in Worcestershire. I had a lot of friends that had anxiety. So ultimately they asked me what I'd done to change myself so completely. My panic attacks stopped, all of my obsessive compulsive responses stopped. My disorder just literally faded away. And of course, all of the people around me wanted to know how and why, when everything else had failed, why this had happened. So I started putting together this, it started as a sheet of paper, and I was handing it out to people and seeing how they responded to those things. And at some point, I had to get to the point where I could research and understand the neurology, the physiology, the psychology of what I'd done. And it was that research that led me to create the structure that I then gave to people in order to recover. And that's where we are now. We're at an advanced version of that, 20-odd years later, where we fine-tuned it so much, and it falls totally in line with high school biology. This isn't psychiatry, it isn't neurology, it is simple biology correctly applied. And when you apply it correctly, the body responds because the body was designed to do that. That's
now,
how
some
we've
people
evolved.
might say, well, you know, if it's as straightforward as school biology, why hasn't this been developed before? Why hasn't this been done before in a way that can actually resolve people's disorders? I mean, Beth, you work very closely with the education programme and the recovery centres. You know, when people ask you that, what do you say?
Well, I say, to be honest, I think it's, when you think about the amount of practitioners that there are in the country that are practising CBT, it's like trying to move a juggernaut. You know, we've tried out there, we've tried speaking to the NHS. At the end of the day, it's a huge undertaking to say what you're doing doesn't work. And we don't want to come across that way. We don't want to come across as being sort of, you know, we have got the solution and you're wrong. We just try and do it in a smaller way. But that is fact. This does actually remove anxiety disorders at their core. Everything else that's been offered out there offers to manage and to help people to cope, but we're about recovery. We know these people can recover, and that's our frustration. And to be honest, we could get on a soapbox and stand, you know, in the middle of in the middle of London in Piccadilly Circus and scream and shout, because it is a big frustration for us. But we're a fairly small organisation. We don't have the power to do that, but we're doing it in a small way.
But you're making some pretty big claims on your website.
Yeah.
You say that, you know, 100% of people are effectively cured.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that's a big, big claim, isn't it?
Yes. It's a little like, and Charles will explain it, it's a little like if you take someone to a gym and put them on an exercise machine and they exercise 3 times a week, 20 minutes a week, they cannot fail to get fitter because their body will respond accordingly. This is the same. If they comply, which means doing it, if they comply and do the programme with consistency, they can expect to get the desired results, which is ultimately recovery. But Charles will explain about the systems and how they work.
Let's talk about the doing. So what is it that people are doing on your programme that's so different, but at the same time brings us back to basic school biology?
Well, if you think about the human animal, what they are at birth genetically is what they are. The only way you can affect that is by doing things to the body. So what you ingest in data and substance gives rise to physical response. If you want to become fitter, you do more exercise. That programs through your neurology, that programs your brain to tell your heart and lungs to work more effectively together, to build muscle mass if it's for lifting weights, if it's for running, to lose body mass so you can move faster and more effectively. So your brain will take over and program your body dependent on what you actually feed into it through your senses. So what you do with your eyes, ears, nose, mouth and skin will give rise to what you are post-birth, pretty much, and also what you ingest. So in order to maintain balance, so physical and mental balance, you have to maintain physical and mental equilibrium. And to do that, and when you're in that position, when you're a newborn child, for example, you're in relative equilibrium. You may have had a difficult birth and be screaming, but ultimately, chemically and physically, you're in balance. What you do after that affects that. So what we do is we put people back into that position of balance. Because if you're born with the predisposition to suffering from anxiety, and there are many, many people that are born without the ability to suffer from anxiety, any of the conditions within anxiety, you have to have the predisposition. And that predisposition is in the genetics of your brain. If you have that, what I call creative intellect, you have the predisposition to suffering. Now, if you go into life, you're walking a knife edge, something could activate that at any point, but that would be a catalyst. Let's say death of a loved one. That can activate high-level fear responses. That may well then activate a fear disorder. Now, the body and brain have been developed in human development to respond in particular ways. And for a simple example, as Beth said, is getting fit. You move your body more, you eat less food, and you will lose weight and get fitter. It's a very simple set of rules. And it's the same with eating. Your brain sends hunger signals out to tell your body that you need fuel, and you then collect fuel, ingest it, and then your body's satisfied. So eating to cure hunger is part of that systemic balance system. And it's the same with anxiety. If you feed in through your senses what your brain needs to make the decision to turn off fear, it turns it off. When the dog runs away safely after you've put your foot on the brake on the road, you go back to relatively level emotions.
Okay, talk us through on practical terms. If someone, because you say that you do this course online, you can go to a retreat, there's many different ways that you can do it, because we all, as you say, we react differently, you know, whether we're kinesthetic learner or so on. So what's the consistency between all those different methods? What are you actually doing? So let's say, for example, I come to you and I want to undergo a course because I'm suffering from anxiety. What am I actually going to do? What's the training program, if you like?
Well, this is part of the difficulty of explaining what happens within the programme, because every human is different. So it is like going to a gym. Somebody might be overweight but not unfit. Somebody might be fit but overweight. It depends on the makeup of that particular person. It also depends on environmental factors. You know, within the family, within their work environment, what they do in life, where they live. There are many factors that affect the recovery. But what we do with those is create a sort of a fine-tuning system, so that we take the core programme and we adjust it for their particular lifestyle. And it differs for every person, but ultimately what the person has to do is create a different version of their current days. So what they're doing at the moment during their waking day, if you like, say it's 7 till 11 at night, what they're doing is unproductive to recovery. So what we do is we give them specific rules that are bespoke to them, and that's done within a training programme.
And what type of rules are we talking about?
Well, it's about day structure, it's about intellectual engagement, it's about the type of intellectual engagement, it's about what you do with your body. There are a whole load of things. But as I say, I couldn't give you a specific example because everybody's different.
So it's the initial part of your dealing with somebody, is that a big assessment process? So you try to really understand who that person is, to see what those trigger points are?
It's more self-assessment. I mean, since '97, when we set this up, what we've done is created a set of tools that help people to understand their condition from the science up, from the foundation up. And once you've created that founding of science and knowledge and understanding, there's a light bulb moment with, I've got this, I get why this is going to work, and then they feel compelled to continue. And then if they follow a set of rules, and as they follow the set of rules, the anxiety starts to come down, their confidence starts to rise, and then they feel even more compelled to do it, because as humans we're set up to do what feels good. And so what feels good you tend to do more of, and because the recovery happens so quickly, they feel compelled to, and their recovery happens very quickly.
You say it happens quickly, so what time period are we talking about?
It depends on the person. It's like being a guitar teacher. How long does it take to learn a guitar? Well, you could do a 2-week intensive course and come out, playing relatively good guitar, or you could spend 3 years practicing 2 minutes a day. It depends on consistency, compliance, and it depends on the person themselves.
And is there anything to do, once you've been through the programme, a little bit like staying fit, there's exercises and things you have to keep on doing?
There's no maintenance programme. Recovery is the disorder of fear, and like all disorders that affect humans throughout life, once the disorder is gone, you go back to order. And it's just that, unfortunately, society has been set up to have us believe certain things.
What happens if you have another trigger point, say, for example, a death of a loved one, something that pushes you into that thing and you have that predisposition that you were talking about? Would that not knock you back?
Well, the wonderful thing about this is that it seems not only to get rid of the current disorder, but it also prepares you to handle incoming stress triggers very differently in the future. So not only does it affect your subconscious and reprogram you to be non-anxious, but it also affects your conscious ability to deal with those stressful things more effectively in the future. We don't generally have people go back to suffering.
I think it's worth us explaining about neuroplasticity, because this programme, we say it's scientific, and it actually works on the basis of neuroplasticity, which is what we're all doing every day. And, if they say that from birth to the age of 10, if we were to retain all of the information and create new neural pathways, we'd have to have the brain or the head of size of a planet. So obviously what happens on a daily basis is called neural pruning. So with the programme, what we're doing is we're taking them from anxious to non-anxious, and that requires neural pruning. Because at the moment, if you imagine they've practiced being anxious, sufferers have practiced it, they've grown, I like to think of them as gnarled branches, and they're in the subconscious. So the subconscious doesn't know that this is wrong, because they've practiced at it, it's continued to grow. But consciously, they know they feel very unwell. Now, whilst anxiety manifests like an illness, it's not an illness, but it does feel like one. And I think the reason with the programme is a lot of it, the empowerment, because we empower the sufferer to say, do you know what, you're not weak, you're not vulnerable, actually you're an incredible human being with this incredible creative intellect, and you can be well. Because after all, like Charles, we went to how many different specialists all over the country, up and down the country, and he always came out feeling sometimes a little reassured, but ultimately, even going to an appointment made him feel like he was ill. I'm ill, I need help. And I think that's with a lot of sufferers, what we don't do is we don't go back. We go from the here and now and move them forward. So we're not talking about their past or addressing what might have happened in their childhood, or, we are about the here and now, because we know that this programme works moving forward. And with the neuroplasticity, we get that asked a lot, how long will it take me? And I always compare it to learning a new language or playing a musical instrument. It's down to practising it.
The thing is, what you're talking about is very much flies in the face of most people's thinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're thinking it is about something that's happened in the past, so you've suffered some trauma.
Yeah.
So really quickly, just before we go to break, how are you getting on with people like NHS, GPs and people like that? Because it's such different thinking.
Yeah.
How you've got great testimonials, but what about the medical profession? How are they taking this?
The problem is that obviously medical and psychological practice is entrenched in decades, if not centuries, of practice models. And if you look at the DSM in America, for example, the DSM? It's the diagnostic system that's used for psychiatric care. Much of it is based on assumption, not on actual medical research. We had a lady walk in, she's just had a baby, she's feeling down. What should we call that? Oh, well, she's just had a baby, so it's postnatal. She's feeling down, let's call it depression. That's going in. It's that kind of process, rather than actually taking 1,000 women and asking them what their experience of this condition was. And so the assumptions that are made have led to treatment models. And those treatment models aren't necessarily based on science, correct science. Anxiety is an emotion. It's the emotion of fear. That's created by chemicals. The chemicals are created in the endocrine system. The endocrine system is in your entire body. Talk about just talking about the adrenal response. If you ask an anxious person, what causes it? Well, it's adrenaline. Well, where's adrenaline created? No. Here, on top of your kidneys. So how's that related to your brain?
Talk about, and it is absolutely fascinating. So we'll talk more in the second half, and also we're going to be talking to somebody who's been through the programme, so we'll get more of a first-hand experience. But for now, what we should say is that we must stress that should you suffer from any medical problems or health concerns, it's always highly recommended that you contact your doctor or GP, as the Health Show gives you an alternative viewpoint to the health concern being discussed. Join us after the break, when we're going to be talking to Wes Hosey, who's attended a retreat programme, and he's going to be sharing his experience with us. Don't go away. Welcome back to The Health Show, where we've been looking at stress and anxiety recovery. Now, in this part of the programme, we're welcoming Wes Hosey. Now, Wes was an anxiety recovery retreat client who, after recovering from anxiety and panic attacks and then graduated, created his own media and PR company. Wes has worked closely with Linden Education professionally, but also now as a well-meaning ex-client whose gratitude for the recovery he received has driven him to become a Linden ambassador. Welcome, Wes. Great to see you.
Thank you.
And I'm dying to hear your story and hear all about it, so really looking forward to that. But before we do that, let's take a look at some of the other testimonies from this programme.
My son Louis went to the theatre just over a year ago and suffered a panic attack and stopped going out. Wouldn't get in a car, just stayed in his room. He's got OCD and just was really, really anxious.
I would have panic attacks, panic disorder, really, really bad panic attacks.
My world had become so isolated and so fragile, and it was a very debilitating lifestyle, and it was a dark period in my life.
I had a terrible fear of sick, and my anxiety prevented me from living a normal teenage life going into adult life and even a bit of childhood as well.
I'm having these panic attacks and heart sweating, my sweating. I don't want to be on the train, I don't want to be in the coach. I've had to leave supermarkets with trolleys full of shopping because I had to get out. And, it was horrible.
I'd start sweating profusely, my heart rate would start going up, I'd be out of breath, and I'd just have to get myself out of the situation.
And Louis was able to follow the Linden Method, and it really, really helped him.
It was probably the most, thankful thing that I'd gone on, because it gave me my life back.
I implemented the Linden Method into my life, and I cannot explain in words the difference in my life.
I think the reason it worked is because everything that Louis was experiencing, Charles had been through.
It gave me the tools to empower myself through my own recovery.
It is the most simplistic plan in the world, but my God, does it work.
Charles and Beth and the whole team, these guys know what they're talking about. They helped explain what anxiety is, why you've got anxiety, and it just all became so clear.
So, Wes, it was great watching that and seeing how people have responded to this particular programme. Tell us about you. First of all, we heard from Charles earlier on that he was 4 when he was aware that he first had this anxiety disorder. What about you?
I think looking back, I probably had it from a younger age, maybe not to quite a big extent, but it started mainly for me on my gap year. I went to Canada as a ski instructor. I'd skied for a long time. I always wanted to go there. I went with some friends. And I was skiing at the time with a good friend of mine who happened to ski in the Canadian downhill team. And we decided to go off-piste down a run that had never been run, and kind of seemed like a good idea at the time. It was also the end of the day. It was the last run of the day. We had our instructor's outfit on. And bomb down, James went, and I kind of didn't take it properly, and I sank just up to my chest in snow. There was nobody on the mountain. I was about 100 yards down into this piste, and started to have lots of thoughts run through my head of, is this where I'm going to die? Is a mountain lion going to come? Is anyone going to save me? Am I going to spend the night here? I was sinking more and more in the snow. I managed to get my skis up, and I crawled to the piste and skied down, and everyone was kind of joking and saying, where have you been? And I kind of laughed it off. And I didn't think too much of it, but that's where it started. And then kind of after that, for a couple of weeks, we were going out partying and having some beers, and I noticed I was becoming quite overly aware that I was feeling unsettled. And even one night I can remember saying to my friend, I was worried I was maybe going to have a heart attack because I was having palpitations and I'd never had it before. And knowing what I do now about the programme, it's quite interesting. But looking at it at the time, I didn't understand it, and it was sporadic at the time. I felt like it here, and then in 2 weeks' time, but then it was in a week's time, and it became more frequent.
And it's quite interesting because you were talking about that, Charles, weren't you? That you maybe have this predisposition, and then maybe that was, Wes's trigger point at that moment. But what about people who maybe feel it on a milder level, that actually, because a lot of people, we hear about good stress, bad stress, we hear about these terms. At what point does it become abnormal? When does it become a disorder from just a little bit of, adrenaline rush or just a little bit of normal anxiety?
When it happens more frequently is the simple answer, and at a higher level. If you're sat at home watching television and you suddenly start to feel anxious, well, you shouldn't be. At that point, your anxiety is inappropriate, your fear is inappropriate, and at that point it becomes anxiety. Stress, as I say, is the blanket term for a whole load of conditions. People use the word stress frequently to mean work and life pressure. That's what it should mean. But when stress isn't a condition as such. It's a physical state. Anxiety is the manifestation of too much stress. So when you have too much work and life pressure, if you have that predisposition, you can then go on to suffer from anxiety. And that's the difference.
And what about you, Wes? When did you realise this wasn't normal? And, and again, you're a young chap, it's very easy just to go, I'll be fine and just rock it through. What made you seek help?
Well, it was a couple of weeks after that event, I started noticing in the morning, before when we kind of have the assembly for the instructors, I'd be calling my parents just for some kind of comfort over the phone, I guess. And I started to notice that my behaviour was becoming quite scared a lot of the time. That horrible feeling you get when you get that rush of worry, I was feeling like that constantly. And then we came home that summer, and then I was supposed to go back to university. I didn't. I took another year out, and then I started to kind of look for help. I had some hypnotherapy. I started taking a few tablets here and there because I thought that was the right thing to do. And then it wasn't until a year or so later that I found Charles's programme.
How did you find it?
At about 4 o'clock in the morning, I think it was. I was watching maybe a YouTube video or something. But I'd been in my bedroom for 3 months at that point, been agoraphobic. I was 21 at the time, so not really the life my parents thought I would be leading at that age. And I can remember running into their bedroom at about 4:30 in the morning, and I'd said, I've watched this video, I don't know what's happened, but something's kind of clicked and I feel better. And then the next day we went to a place called Crooks Peak, down just outside of Bristol, and we climbed up that. And bearing in mind I hadn't left my room for 3 months because I was so scared, I'd have my meals in my bedroom, and went out for the next day with my brother and my dad and the dog, and we climbed the hill, came back, and I thought, right, I'm fixed. And then I started to feel things again, and then I got in touch with the organisation and they said, look, that's totally normal, and explained things to me, and then that was really when I started to recover.
So how did you go through the treatment? Did you do an online course? Did you go to one of the retreats? What did you do and how long did it take you? I mean, Charles mentioned earlier on that it does vary from person to person. Talk about your treatment and how it went and what actually happened.
Yeah, so I went to a retreat. I was in my final year of university at the time, and I really kind of wanted to try and nip it in the bud because it had been going on at that point for a good couple of years. And I wanted to try and get back to kind of myself, really, for the remainder of that year. So I went to a retreat, which was about 4 days, I think it was, which was a very unique experience in itself because there's people from all around the world there, different cultures, languages, but also it's quite unique to be in a room of people that feel the same as you, to a degree, when you feel like you're the only one that is living that life. And then out the back of that, I then, you know, you can talk to the team on the phone, and I did the programme after then, but it was very immersive, and yeah, it changed my life, really.
And how long did the treatment take you?
To start to really feel better?
Yeah.
Well, I felt immediately better when I left the retreat, and then it was just every day I was just feeling better and better and better and doing more things. And I think at the end of that summer, I had gone in April, May time. I flew to Boston on my own, which to a lot of people is a normal thing. But that was a big thing for me.
And how long were you actually at the retreat for?
I was there for the whole thing.
They run Tuesday to Friday usually. Yeah. They're 4 days.
So literally just 4 days? Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quite incredible. Now, obviously, one of the things that people will be looking at, we've seen your website, there's beautiful venues and things. What kind of cost are we talking about here? Because this isn't something the NHS will pay for, so it is going to be private. What are we talking about?
What we've done over the years is recognise that people with anxiety generally either aren't working or work at a limited way, so, you know, money is an issue. So we've done something for everybody. Now, there are people out there that like the immersive style of education, so they would love to come to the retreat, but they can't afford it. We try to make it as affordable as possible. The way we've done that is we've done 3 access models, if you like. We've done the home learning programme, which you can access today, with immediate support and help from our team. All of the resources are there, all of the guidance is there right now to start right away. So in effect, what we've done is created a remote form of the retreat, if you like. Then we've got the workshops. We do a 1-day workshop. Now, and the retreats, the 4-day retreats, all of them give you immediate access. They give you constant, ongoing, seamless support. Now, our support specialists aren't just recovery specialists. These are psychotherapists and psychologists who aren't working in that practice, but have the skills needed to communicate the recovery effectively. They've all suffered. They all know how the sufferer feels. So they can give qualified advice about how to build the recovery quickly. And we've been doing it since '97, so...
But coming back to the question, where do prices start?
Oh, the home learning programme is £179.
OK.
And that includes 12 months of support by telephone and email. The workshops are about £800 and the retreats are just under £3,000. But bear in mind that, you know, and obviously it's easy to look at that and say, well, that sounds expensive. And it is to some people, it's not the kind of price that they could pay. But when you look at other healthcare, residential healthcare for mental health issues, it is substantially less expensive. but what you do get is instruction in recovery, not support, talking. You actually get a plan.
The challenge that you have, obviously, though, is that people will see the results on the website, which are extremely convincing, and some fantastic testimonials we've just seen there. But where do you place yourselves in terms of between being medical, being alternative? Because it's something very, very different to anything else that's out there. So, at the end of the day, people are going to be parting with, sometimes large sums of money. So how do you place yourself so that people can feel comfortable spending that kind of money on their health?
Well, we're quite unique, really, because within the NHS's step care model, for example, you've got guided self-help right there in the middle. You've also got psychoeducation, which is where we belong. We're an educational organisation. We teach people how to recover and how to use their bodies and minds to recover. So we are quite unique within that form of healthcare, if you want to call it that. So we don't fall into psychology or psychiatry. So we are unique, but the other thing that we are is obviously very practiced at creating recovery, and that's so evident on the websites. The people that are on the websites are real people who've recovered, and that's not evident anywhere else. So in every way we're quite unique. That's not to say, though, that we don't get referrals from NHS practitioners, private practitioners, within health and mental health.
So there are some GPs and some people out there who recognise what you're doing and are very supportive, because you've clearly got some great celebrity endorsements and things like that, and obviously people like Wes coming on as an ambassador. And for you, Wes, if you had to describe it to somebody else, because again, people who have been through lots of treatments like yourself, will have tried lots of things, how would you describe, how would you encapsulate the experience that you went through that has become so transformative?
Well, it's approaching the whole topic in a completely different way, and I think that's what initially I and my family kind of struggled to kind of understand initially, because even when you're talking about the price of it, to actually get the whole year of support for what is the same as going to see a hypnotherapist for 2 or 3 sessions, but actually it's going to change your life, it's kind of a no-brainer. And then that was the decision that we made. And it's, I don't know, when you then understand that whole change of it, and it shifts your kind of understanding totally of what it is as a...
It makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, this is the thing, very often, as an ex-sufferer, and I'm sure Wes will endorse this, when you sit in front of somebody and they're telling you things about yourself, but you're sat there thinking, well, that's actually not quite true of me. What you're saying makes sense within what your practice model, but actually it doesn't apply to me. And I mean, I've had tens of thousands of sufferers sat in front of me over the years, as you can imagine, and I've heard every story there is. But the thing that is most consistent is the experience with the treatments offered for their conditions. And there are 1,000 treatments out there. For example, with cut skin, you can go to a pharmacy and say, look, I've cut my thumb, and they'll give you 1,000 things to try. But actually, the shelf needs to be this big. You need something to sterilise it, something to dress it, and the body does the rest of the stuff. Your body will take over and fill the gap. And it's the same with this. Once the science is in place, recovery happens.
Now, anxiety manifests itself in a huge amount of different ways, as we've discussed. You've both talked about different things that you went through. When does it become something that actually you need treatment for, or when is it just something, that's just part of your quirk, that's part of your personality?
Well, I think for both of us, as ex-sufferers, we'll say that any amount of anxiety is unnecessary and inappropriate. If everybody's going to feel anxious, for example, or fearful, should I say, not anxious, if they have to give a speech at work, or perhaps if they don't particularly like flying. But those are specific phobias, and you can get over those in a different way. But if anxiety is the disorder of the emotion of fear, so it's a constant, you're anxious whether you're asleep or awake, and that manifests in so many ways. If you live your life with anxiety, if you feel inappropriately fearful at any time, that's the point at which you need to take action.
But who's deciding whether it's inappropriate or not?
I think this is part of the problem, and this goes back to your previous question, because when I'm describing it to somebody now about what is the programme, why is it different, it's understanding that it's actually a learnt behaviour instead of there's something kind of psychologically massively wrong with you. I think once you understand that, and then through what Beth was saying earlier, it's almost like learning to drive a car, suddenly the mountain that you're thinking, I'm never going to change, this is me, actually you're like, OK, I can change this, But then on the question you've got at the minute is, again, it's down to what are the expectations of people. And a lot of people, their understanding is, well, it's either I take some tablets and I have to deal with this. Yeah, they don't actually quite understand that there's something wrong with them. So I think there's that balance of, I'll deal with it, oh, it's too bad, I need to get help. But actually, if they understood that, they could change things quite quickly.
And also it's important to understand that this is a sign of great strength. People feel vulnerable, they feel ill, but actually when they realise that that is founded on a basis of great strength and that it's because they're so incredible that they suffer and not because they're weak and vulnerable, that changes everything. For everybody, for the family, for the sufferer themselves, and for their whole vision of their future. Our recovered sufferers go on to do great things.
Well, I was going to say, let's talk about your life now, Wes. You were saying you were, I believe, 21 when you were on that mountain.
Yeah.
You now run this PR company, a media company in Bristol. You know, how long's it been since you last felt anxious in the way that you did on those immediate weeks after that mountain incident?
I haven't felt the same since I've recovered, really. It's totally changed my life. I mean, if you asked me before, when I was in my bedroom, what my life would look like, I honestly, I don't know if I'd really be here today if I hadn't done this programme, which is quite kind of scary for me to say that, but it's probably the truth. And now, you know, I got married a couple of years ago. We've got a 5.5-month-old little girl. I don't know, I take things and absorb them much more than I probably would have done before.
And what do you say to the sceptics out there who say, you know what, we've heard these things come and go, people, you know, it's all wonderful, you've got the glossy adverts, the promotional videos, but actually I'm not really convinced. I don't really see the science behind this. What would you say to them?
Well, I think it's different from my side to Charles's side, because even though Charles has done it, it's, you know, he's got a business, but I think I'm a walking, living proof that actually it works. But it's not just me, it's lots of other people. And I've recommended friends to do it, they've done it, and it's changed their life. But it's interesting because once you've gone through something like that, I think it makes you stronger, you live your life in a different way. When I recovered, I left the job I was in to go and start my own business. And if even I've been in the theatre before and I've heard people behind in the back row saying, I don't know what to do about our cousin, da-da-da-da-da, and then you can't help but turn around and say, look, like, I'm sorry to overhear, but just go and look at this and trust me, it will change their life.
Now, is there a possibility that this works for some and not others? But there's lots of different treatments for all sorts of conditions, you know, some with mental health and some physical, where people say, well, that works for some people but not others. But as I said before, you make this claim that 100% of people who actually comply with the programme, go through the programme fully according to the way you instruct it, that it will absolutely work for them.
The thing is, we're all human. You know, we may have had different life experiences, different genetics, but ultimately we're created to the same blueprint. We're all the same inside. And the thing is, if you're human and you have anxiety, it means you have inappropriate fear, therefore you have the disorder of fear, and this process can't fail. It's doing it correctly is it's the compliance problem. You know, there are some people who say, I can't comply. I live on the Isle of Skye. What am I supposed to do? I'm very isolated. You know, I live on my own. You can comply, it's just that we have to adjust it for your compliance to be effective. But it can't. The process itself can't fail any more, like I said earlier, than eating can fail to cure hunger. If you ingest food, it's going to cure your hunger. If you ingest water, your thirst.
Is there anything that people watching now can do immediately, just themselves, you know, before going on the programme? Do you have any tips or helpful advice for people maybe suffering from some form of anxiety that they can actually do that might mitigate their feelings of anxiety a little bit?
Well, I think one of the things that leads most people to have a thorough understanding and therefore their fear levels drop isn't necessarily a technique. Because ultimately, if you're set to be unfit, you're unfit. You can't fake fitness. And it's the same with anxiety. There's nothing I can give you as a quick tip. I mean, yes, there are paper bag techniques, drinking a glass of water that can lower your heart rate, but it's not a fix. You know, it's just a con. You're conning your body to react differently. The one thing I think that is most compelling, if you like, for people when they understand. Obviously, I've said about the creative intellect and the fact that it's their greatness that causes this, not their frailty. I think that's part of that process. But also understanding that if you've got generalised anxiety disorder, panic disorder, agoraphobia, emetophobia, health anxiety, OCD, eating disorders, self-harming, the core condition that drives that is anxiety. How it manifests is down to the what if. And anxiety sufferers listening to this will know what I mean by what if. It's that thought, it's a notion actually, a chemical notion that says, what in this environment could cause me harm? And then, of course, in fight or flight, you're supposed to identify that thing, and then your compulsion is to deal with it. The man with the gun, the tiger, whatever it happens to be.
Well, I feel like we've just scraped the tip of the iceberg, but sadly we are out of time.
No problem.
But really, really fascinating stuff. Thank you so much indeed. Well, that is all we have time for, and I would like to thank all of our guests, Charles and Beth Linden, and especially Wes, for coming onto the show and talking about your experiences. So thank you very much indeed. And once again, we must stress that should you suffer from any medical problems or health concerns, it's always highly recommended that you contact your doctor or GP, as the Health Show gives you an alternative viewpoint to the health concern being discussed. If you'd like to find out any more about this or any of the subjects that we've been discussing on the show or throughout the series, please do get in touch at healthshow@islamchannel.tv. Again, that's healthshow@islamchannel.tv. In the meantime, it's goodbye from me and see you again next week. Assalamu alaikum.